I've previously shared 2 other ghost stories here, and well, there's really only a few more strange, unexplained things I can think of. The next of which is being Little Jimmy. From 2008 to 2013, my uncle owned a bakery where I worked during my college years. Sadly, it closed when he died unexpectedly. The building itself was a very old one and was basically just a long rectangle shape. We divided it up into 3 rooms and added the actual bakery part onto the back. The first room where you walked in, obviously, was the storefront, with a door to the right that led into our cake decorating room. It's what it sounds like. A room where we would decorate cakes, store things, and just use as a general back room. Continuing through that room was the second back area, with freezers and the storage closet, and a mini office room divided off from it. Continuing from there through the original back door was the bakery. Anyway, the building had actually been a lot of things in its life. It was multiple bars, a hair salon at one point, and it was even a brothel. This was a place where some pretty famous gangsters also passed through back in the day. So even its basement had hidden rooms from the times of Prohibition. But this is all just backstory for what the building itself was. As for what happened to us working there, it was just a lot of strange things. The first thing I can ever remember happening was a cupcake holder flying across the room. We kept it on a shelf on the right side of the cake decorating room by the door. And one day we heard a loud crash that scared the heck out of us. Me and my co-worker went back there to see what fell or broke, and to our surprise, we found the cupcake holder all the way across the room by the other door laying on its side. We didn't think much of it though, as this was before we even would suspect a ghost or whatever. The second event occurred maybe a year or so later, and happened in the middle of the night while my uncle and the other staff were baking. One of our co-workers turned around to see what appeared to be a little boy with an old-looking hat on. It freaked her out, but apparently she was a part of some ghost hunting team and said she was used to this sort of thing. That night, I remember me and my parents went over there as well, but of course we didn't see anything. After this thing started getting a little more weird and annoying, things would randomly go missing and show up in other places. We'd hear loud footsteps in the back as someone headed to the front. But rather than opening the door and walking into the storefront, they would stop at the door and no one would be there when we opened it to look. Same thing would happen a lot in the back room as well, where you'd hear someone's boots climbing up the ramp from the bakery, but vanish at the top of the ramp. Eventually my uncle started calling it Little Jimmy, and whenever something weird would happen, we would just blame it on him. Strange things like this continued for years, up until we had to close down. Now the place has been reopened as yet another bar, and I can't help but wonder if they experienced the same things we did. When my daughter was born, I would be the one to primarily put her to bed in her crib at night. I would rock her back and forth in an old chair in the corner of the room. One night while I was rocking her to sleep, she perked up and started waving at the wall in the room. It was weird, but children do weird things, so I just brushed it off. She would do weird things like this every other night. However, the creepiest moment was the one night when she was sleeping in the bed with my wife and I, and me and my daughter, both woke up at the same time in the middle of the night. I saw that the door to our bedroom was wide open, and my daughter propped herself up and giggled and covered her eyes, saying, "Peekaboo, I see you," into the darkness. This would be creepy enough on its own, but my daughter was really young and couldn't say very many phrases at the time, and this was the first time she ever said those words. Needless to say, it was an uneasy night. When I was around 12 years old, I was at a cousin's house for a party. Pretty sure it was around Christmas time. We were hanging out in their backyard. Part of their backyard is wooded area. And came to this tree that used to have a treehouse in it. All that was left of that treehouse is some steps leading to it and a few platforms. Not safe to get up if you can even at all. My cousin, 8 male at the time, told us the story about the kids who had that treehouse had died when it collapsed. I personally thought this was a bunch of BS, but went with it. We eventually headed back to the house, but I decided to go back into the woods alone. As I was walking into the woods, I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me, like I was safe there, safer than anywhere else. As I'm walking, I'm looking around and I see a light blue and white checkered flag up in a super thin tree that I didn't notice before. As I'm looking at this, I'm trying to figure out how I got there. Then I started hearing kids' voices, laughing, talking, just having fun. I didn't think too much of it. At the time, as my cousins were out in the treehouse, a new one they built, not the old rundown one. As I'm walking closer to the old treehouse, the voices seemed louder, and I look back up at the flag. It was moving despite there not being any wind. I shake it off as I couldn't feel the wind from down here, but up there was wind, and I looked back down. That's when I saw them. 6 children with white skin, like snow white skin. There was no snow on the ground, by the way. They all seemed to be wearing winter gear, though dull and dirty looking. They were walking towards me, but I didn't run. I wasn't afraid for some reason. I heard a branch snap, and that's when I ran. As I went back towards my cousin's house, I was surprised to see that they weren't outside. I found them in the living room playing video games. When I asked them when they came in, they said, "When you were walking to the woods, why?" The kids I heard weren't them. Still don't know to this day who those kids were. They weren't other neighbor kids, as none of them lived close to my cousins. Were they a figment of my imagination? Whatever it was, it's one of the reasons I believe. This is a true story. My grandma's house was built over an old city dump, which was cleared out and built over in the 1970s. God only knows what kind of supernatural energy they stirred up ripping this place apart. Her house never felt right. You would always feel watched when you knew you were alone. Random stuff would appear out of nowhere. I have always wanted to take a metal detector and run through her yard with it. You would see shadows in the corner of your eye. All the time stuff would vanish and move and then reappear months later, when you knew that nobody had touched it, etc. When I was around the age of 5, I met my imaginary friend by the name of Billy. Why I put that in air quotes is because I don't think he is imaginative. Billy is a bright little boy. He looked to be around the age of 8 or 9. I think he is from the 1950s. He wears a yellow checkered shirt with a pair of blue overalls. His brown hair was always slicked neatly to the sides of his face. And he has blue eyes with freckles. He kind of looks like a young Sheldon. The reason why I don't think he is imaginary is because, 1, he only lived at my grandparents' house. 2, my sister saw him too, even though I had never mentioned Billy to her. 3, I saw him until I cut contact off with my grandmother at the age of 12 due to her narcissistic behavior. Billy would tell me that he was going to marry me when I grew up. He would hold my hand, kiss me, and play with my hair. He even gave me a ring that I still own. Whenever I would mention Billy to my parents or my grandparents, they would tell me that I was imagining things. Billy and I would always play together. His favorite game was hide and seek, but Billy would play dolls with me as well. He would play anything I asked. As I got older, I would normally just talk to him. Sometimes we would play games, but it wasn't as often as it was when I was younger. Of course, Billy didn't age. Despite me growing older than him, he still was focused on marrying me. When I would ask him where his parents were, he wouldn't say anything. He would often just look at his shoes or tell me he didn't want to talk about it. In fact, he would do the same thing whenever I would ask him about anything involving his family or home life. I once asked him why he was here. He told me he died in a brutal way and that he couldn't move on. He didn't tell me anything more. When I asked him how he died, once again he stared at his shoes and told me he didn't want to discuss it, so I left it alone. The last time I saw Billy, he told me that he wasn't going to see me for a long time and that he might visit me in my dreams. Flash forward 2 years later to last night. I saw Billy in my dreams. He gave me a hug and told me how much he missed me and told me that I had gotten bigger. We had a conversation that I cannot remember. He finally told me that his dad killed him and disposed of his body in the old city dump that was cleared out to make room for the construction of my grandparents' house and the surrounding neighborhood. From 2010 to 2011, my family lived briefly in an early 1900s house in Ashland, Kentucky. The house was 3 floors, with the 3rd floor being a converted attic. My older sister's bedroom was essentially the whole 3rd floor, while my younger brother and I shared a room on the 2nd floor next to my parents. For my siblings and me, there was a definite culture shift in moving to Ashland from Nashville, Tennessee. We went from a more suburban area to somewhat more remote area of northern Kentucky. We were further in the Appalachian, and the people were definitely different. We noticed it first in the behaviors of our next door neighbors. The house on our left belonged to an old hoarder named Joan. The woman was rarely seen, but monstrous when she would confront my family and me. She didn't drive, but there was an old gray sedan filled to the brim with newspapers and trash that sat in her driveway for as long as we lived there. Her backyard was littered with ancient-looking antiques, statues, and furniture. After once finding my brother and I snooping around her yard laughing at all the junk she had collected, she made a statement along the lines of, "Ruth should straighten you out," and motioned back towards our house. We never thought much of it until our next door neighbor mentioned that a previous owner of our house was a longtime friend of hers named Ruth. Ruth had died in the house years before. Hearing that was more than enough to creep the hell out of me and my brother. Inside our house, it was my sister that first started having strange experiences. She's around 17 at the time, yet almost like a young child. She could hardly stay in the house by herself. She said that her bedroom scared her, and she felt like something was in her closet. The 3rd floor had 3 closets, and the biggest one had 2 sliding doors. My sister mentioned that many times she would think the door was closed, looked away, and then find it open without any explanation. At nighttime, there was a few times when she came downstairs knocking on my parents' door, asking for them to keep it down, only to notice that the noise wasn't coming from anyone in the house. It was muffled speaking that only my sister could hear in her room. After a few months, my sister became so uncomfortable on the 3rd floor that she moved into our 2nd floor guest room. My brother and I quickly begged to take the 3rd floor room because it meant more space. We didn't really know at that time how scared my sister was of the 3rd floor. Right away, I was definitely able to feel a tension in the room. I would often feel like I was buzzing on high alert for no reason. One way to describe the feeling would be if it was similar to how you'd feel moments after someone almost hit you with their car. Even after the moment is over, you can feel your heart race, your mind buzz, and your sense heighten. Almost daily, I would feel the tension in the room and start to get this overwhelming feeling. The sliding door closet was, for whatever reason, the center of a lot of the incidents I had witnessed. Multiple times I watched the door slide open with no one pulling or pushing it. The floor was level and we tested the AC to see if an air vent was causing the sliding door to blow open, and we couldn't find a connection. One night my brother had his friend over and they were playing with Legos in the room in the front of the closet. I watched as the shut door slammed open just behind them. The three of us sprinted downstairs screaming. And though my mom was able to console us, she's told me years later now that she was terrified. She fully started believing that something was in the house once she had the closet slam open in front of her. She then felt a cold rush around her shoulders and back and panicked and left the house. About a month after that, she moved my brother and I back into our second floor bedroom, and we only used the third floor as a guest room. Though it's been over 10 years, I still remember being petrified of being in that room alone, even during the day. It was a very stressful point in my childhood, and I feel like I still attach a lot of negativity and bad memories to that time. I never had any other paranormal experiences outside of this, but my experiences in Ashland were so strong that it is tough for me to be a skeptic. Something is truly in that house and could very well be a ghost named Ruth. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I remember going to sleep over at a kid's house. I will call him Richard. Though this was long ago, I may be forgetting what his real name is. Their parents were friends with my parents, so we weren't real close friends, but I was very happy about it. He had what may be the coolest thing for a kid in the 80s to ever see, a Pac-Man arcade cabinet in his basement. Now, to help understand this story, you need to understand the layout of the house. This was a raised ranch-style home. You walked in the front door looking at a small set of stairs that led down to a finished basement area, and a similar set of stairs right next to it going up to the main floor. You could see the kitchen from the landing of the stairs as you entered the house, and to the right was a living room. The left side of the main floor was a hallway to the 3 bedrooms and bathroom. One was Richard's, where I would be sleeping with another one of his friends. I will call him Michael. I don't remember what his real name was, though. But the basement was what I focused on, because as you went down to the basement family room, there was a hallway that has a small room to the left where the arcade cabinet was. It was a small room covered with brown wood paneling, like all basements in the 80s had. The front door of the coin receptacle was left open, so you did not need quarters. You would just flick the little metal pin to mimic a quarter and play. This is where I wanted to go. But it was time for bed. Now, going into Richard's room, it was covered in WWE, well, WWF at the time, wrestling posters and toys. I was not as into them as the two of them were. I had Nintendo, but played with them like kids do. We ended up staying up very late, much too late, because the parents just let them stay up and do whatever, as was also common in the 80s, and it was great. This was also my first real sleepover where we had run of the house. Considering we were 3 boys not being watched, we were not doing anything dangerous. Play wrestling, watching TV in his room, and going to the kitchen for junk. However, we were not playing Pac-Man, yet I thought. At some point, I am sitting in Richard's room by myself. The two of them left for some reason. I felt a little uncomfortable or whatever silly reason. They were gone a long time. Self-conscious over the fact that I was not close friends with either of them, I asked myself, what were they doing without me? Let me check. I'd leave the room walking towards the basement thinking that must be it. Even if they were not there, I would get to go play. So, 1-1. I walked down the stairs to the basement where it was dark but bright enough to see. It may have been a full moon or there was outside lights because I did not need to turn any lights on. I saw the room and saw the hallway where the arcade awaits. But then Richard walked out and stood in front of me. He did not say anything, and he was in his underwear. This was very uncomfortable because he looked mad, like he did not want me to go down there. I stood on the bottom step, not moving for a while, none of us saying anything. Finally, I figured, okay, you don't want me down here, and went back upstairs to go to bed. Looked up the second stairs towards the kitchen. Is where the chill crawled up my spine. Richard and Michael were in the kitchen getting something to eat, and were up there the whole time. Now, Richard was the only child, and there was no one else in the house other than his mother and father. Their rooms were across the hall from his. There was no other way from the basement to the kitchen, and other than maybe from outside. They could not have walked past me without me knowing, and there was not enough time to put clothes back on and get into the kitchen if they were just pranking me. They also did not say anything about what I saw, because I said nothing, thinking if they were pranking me, they would have mentioned it. I went into the kitchen and ate some food and went right to bed. Again, this was a joke. A 7 to 8 year old boy would have said something. Did not say a word to anyone about the kid in the basement. To this day, I have no explanation for this. When I was younger, about 4 or 5, I had a rocking horse that my aunt had bought at a yard sale. The horse would always rock on its own, and my parents would say I was talking to someone that wasn't there. One day I was playing in the room alone and seen a little blue boy. He was all blue and was a little see-through. He pushed me off the horse, and I started screaming and crying. We later got rid of the horse and put it in my grandma's attic. One time my grandma was babysitting me, and we went into the attic for clay, and I seen the horse. I tried to ignore it, but my grandma got a phone call and had to go downstairs while I was getting the clay. I heard something move. I turned around and the horse was moving. I ran out there, and I never went back into her attic again.